Hey, my name is Adrienne Yo, and I am excited to share some things that I've learned about driving interactivity when presenting to adult learners with you. I'm an alum of the Presenters Bootcamp through Alive, and I've presented through Alive's Academy as well as MAVA's DEI conference previously. I also co-founded Alive's Animal Welfare COP and have presented several times for the COP for those studying for their CVA exam. The Presenters Bootcamp, though, was by far my favorite Alive experience because I learned so many things that I was able to put into practice immediately. And I'm so excited to share some of what I learned with you. We're going to get started today by talking about how adults learn, then discuss how we keep adult learners engaged through polls and animation. We'll talk about the power of pictures and icons over words, and then do a brief recap. So, to get started, how do adults learn? And in particular, how do they learn in virtual settings? The first thing that you need to do with adult learners is hook them. They need to be engaged in a meeting or a training within the first 5 minutes. And engaged doesn't mean talked to, it actually can mean being asked something. It's important for adult learners to share the knowledge that they already have about the topic in order for them to be more fully engaged in the information that you're sharing with them. Adults also need to feel that what you're sharing with them is relevant to their life or their work. And if your topic is interesting, if the learners don't think that it will apply to them, they're very likely to tune out. And that's the last thing that we want. Relevance is also about how the presenter appears to them. A presenter who appears to be comfortable and fluent with their presentation will likely keep the attention of the learners more than presenters who come across as stilted or unpracticed. And the last thing to note is distractions. Adult learners are very likely to face distractions, particularly in a virtual environment. When you're learning in person, it's rude to pull out your cell phone and start scrolling through it. But when you're learning virtually, it's easy to open another tab or to go off camera and maybe even start doing your dishes. I know I've done that before. Knowing this is extra important for us as presenters to keep learners engaged in order to keep their attention. Having a learner's attention means that everyone will be more likely to meet their learning objectives by the end of your presentation. So now we'll talk about polls and animation, which are two great techniques to keep learners engaged. Why should we do polls? Polls can help us as the presenter gauge what learners already know, what they want to know, and what they care about, and how they are feeling. Further into presentations, polls help us gauge how relevant the information is for learners and if they're retaining the information in real time. If we do a knowledge check at the beginning, middle, and end of the presentation, we have an opportunity to course correct if we find that learners are not meeting the objectives along the way, and check in with everybody to see what would help them meet their learning objectives if something goes off. Start using polls early on in your presentation and use them throughout the presentation to chunk up the information that you're sharing. The frequency of polls may depend on what you're sharing, how long your presentation is, and what your learning objectives are. So, how do you decide which platform is best to use for learners? First, know that polls don't have to be yes or no questions. They can be word clouds, knowledge checks, whiteboards, or even something as simple as reactions. Engagement tools can be very simple, they can also be very complex. When you're deciding which platform to use, think about what your learners may already be familiar with and how comfortable they might be using different platforms. Some of the more intermediate and advanced engagement tools might be best for learners coming to a longer series, say staff members doing a 3-part webinar. If you're doing a 15-minute information session for prospective volunteers, you likely don't know the technical knowledge or capabilities of your attendees. So you may want to select an engagement tool that is a bit more basic. It should go without saying that you should only select engagement tools that you're comfortable with yourself. and that you are able to use fluently and test out ahead of time. A few additional things to consider before getting an engagement tool is how much time you have for the presentation, how much time you have to explain these tools, if the tools integrate with the platform that you're using, such as WebEx, Teams, or Zoom, and whether or not you have someone who is able to do troubleshooting for you. If you're presenting and you have someone in the producer role, that person can assist a learner with getting access to, say, a mural board or a Miro board. But if you're presenting solo or your producer is sharing slides and running the chat, they may not have the bandwidth to troubleshoot with learners in the moment. If a learner struggles to access the engagement tools, they may get overwhelmed or disappointed, and their attention may drop. I provided a list here of potential engagement tools for your learners. Some of these tools are really basic, like asking learners to write an answer in the chat or asking them to use reactions. There are also some great built-in engagement features on Zoom and Teams, including a word cloud now available on Teams. Just know that Zoom and Teams are continuously adding new audience engagement features, so before you go out and look at a subscription for a service like Mentimeter or Miro or Jamboard or one of these higher level tools, features of the tools that you may really like may already be available on your platform for free or to add for a low cost. So now we'll move on to animations. And you've seen me using animations throughout this presentation. I personally love animations because they are a great way for me as the presenter to stay on the same slide while providing interactivity for you as the learner. If nothing changes on a slide for more than 30 seconds, typically learners will start to tune out. When I change something, they'll tune back in because they'll see a visual change. Animations are also helpful when I'm trying to shape the flow of information that I'm giving with you, express the information's meaning. Animations are great when I'm sharing something more detailed or advanced. If I'm sharing a complex chart, it makes sense to roll out the information on the chart slowly rather than sharing the whole chart with learners, which is possibly really overwhelming to them. When we share too much information in too short a time with our learners, we don't chunk it up, we risk fire hosing them. And when people get fire hosed, they don't absorb the information we're providing and are more likely to tune out. The best advice I can give you about using animations is to make sure that you preview and practice your animations before you present live. This will help you find out if there are any hiccups in the way that you're sharing animations and make sure that the information that is supposed to go first does indeed come first. If someone else is sharing your screen, you'll want to ensure that they know animations are present and that you practice when to share the animations ahead of time. I recommend going through the presentation with your co-presenter at least 1 or 2 times if you have animations. So now we're going to talk about the power of pictures and icons to bolster your presentation. But first, we'll talk about language and text. As we noted before, your learners are possibly dealing with distractions, particularly in a virtual environment. It's important for you to use language that is simple, and I recommend looking up the plain language style guide if this is something you want to learn more about. The more that your audience has to grapple with and consider what it is you're trying to say, the less likely they are to stay tuned in and learn what you hope they'll learn. Pictures and icons are a key part of your narrative. Most people learn best when there's a picture uh, or an icon rather than a picture, narration, and text. When we have a picture, narration, and text, it can overload our brains and actually hinder learning. But we do want to honor that some people prefer to learn with lots of text. And one way to do that is to offer supplemental materials to go along with the learning materials so that your screen doesn't have a ton of text on it for the average learner. To recap what we talked about today, the first thing you'll want to do when you begin a presentation is hook your learners through relevant content. You'll want to keep your audience engaged through polls, animation, and narrative that has minimal tech. If you take one thing away today, to make certain that you practice everything that you're going to share ahead of your presentation so that you come across as polished and professional. Thank you so much for watching today. I really appreciate your time and wish you lots of luck on your journey as a presenter.